All right, so this is the title of my talk. And let me see if I can do this differently. All right. I'm going to, the aim of my talk here is to give you some brain candy or some interesting facts about the social behavior and evolution of primates. And I'll first talk a little bit about the primates of Sri Lanka, about Toque macaque society in particular, especially their processes of life and death, and their what's involved in their selection of mates, getting married, and raising their young. And finally, our newest publication, which I'm rather really taken by, hot off the press, Quadrifat in the Evolution of Monkeys and Humans. Our primate biology program has been in existence for many years, and our mission basically is to acquire more knowledge about the biology of primates, their social evolution, and it's a multifaceted phenomenon, so we have many different persons participating, not just behaviorists, but also physiologists, geneticists, and nutritionists, and so forth. So we're trying to look at monkey behavior from monkeys from all aspects, not just behavior per se, in different contexts. Conservation is always an issue. We try to find conservation-based solutions to conservation challenges. Of course, the knowledge base is never the issue. The problem is implementing what we already know. We know a lot, but it just can't get it implemented properly. And education, we have programs of outreach of Polonnaruwa, and we really try to encourage filmmakers to come here and make good quality films to get the message about monkey behavior out not only to the Sri Lankan audience, but also globally. We really need to get people to understand monkeys, to like monkeys, otherwise we'll never get them to do anything for conservation. Conservation is a land property issue, conflict issue, and people need to give up something in order to have wildlife. We've been studying these monkeys at Polonnaruwa for the longest time, since before 1960. This is the Angkor they had many years ago. And our monkeys are distributed not only in the forest, but also among the archaeological ruins of Polonnaruwa. And the macaque species in Sri Lanka really occurs as three very distinct subspecies. The ones that we study at Polonnaruwa are from the dry zone, then we have those in the lowland wet zone and around Kandy, and then we have a very rare and actually critically endangered subspecies, and these are the highland zone of Macaca opisthomilus. And they are endangered simply because they're losing habitat. They're losing their prime habitat owed to the expansion of vegetable plots. You go to Nerelia and you just see this total devastation of the highland forest. Something really ought to be done. Somebody ought to pluck up the political courage to stop this felling of natural habitat in order to have more carrot patches. It used to be dairy farms also. I won't say any more about conservation because it's a long and many things to say, so I'll proceed from here. Leave it with that message at least. The Toque macaques in Polonnaruwa, again, are the dry zone subspecies. We also have the purple-faced langur living at Polonnaruwa, and the Hanuman langur, the gray langur, and the nocturnal loris. You know all these species anyway, don't you? And am I going too fast for somebody? No. Okay, I just thought you know these animals anyway. The three species, the macaques and the two langur species, they live in this. They share the same habitat. They use it somewhat differently ecologically, so that they can coexist. Now, if you wanted to understand that the evolution or macaque society, basically anything about life, then the understanding of natural selection is really basic in applying your thoughts to this. All traits of monkeys and living things, whether it's behavior, anatomy, their physiology, biochemistry, they serve one purpose only, and that is to promote copies of the genes that will program those traits into future generations. only the genes or the traits that are supported by genes, by DNA and so forth, that promote the survival and reproductive success of a particular individual or trait will survive in an environment. Traits are adapted to be most efficient in a particular environment. Environments change, so therefore traits have to change, so therefore the genetic underpinnings of adaptations also change. And that's very basically what natural selection is all about. Genes that fail to program for adaptations for traits that promote the survival and reproductive success of individuals, they tend to eventually be selected out and be removed from the population. And it's by this process that we get change, that species evolve into new types, and then you get progressively more complex or differently adapted anyway species. Changes in the environment basically drive the evolution of species, and that is true also for primates, including ancestral man or ancestral hominids. One trait that's very important for primates or for monkeys is that they live in a society, so they need to know who's who are my friends and who are my enemies. So macaques have actually evolved to look differently as individuals. And that helps them to recognize their friends and enemies and to respond appropriately. So for example, if we look at these three females, they differ slightly in face color. The head hair structure, the toque differs. The one on the left has a very dark lip pigment. And their head hair structures are different as well. Here are two males. Again, they have dark red and black spots in their faces, and their head hair differs, the toque structure differs. The word toque, incidentally, refers to the cap of hair that these animals have on top of their head. And in toque macaques, you have 3 tracts of hair that interdigitate to give each individual a unique hairdo. So we can tell individuals, and definitely members of a family, apart by their hairdo. So that's very useful for us as observers, scientific observers, but of course the monkeys also use these morphological differences amongst themselves to tell who's who. And from a scientific perspective, what we have identified more than 5,000 animals over the last 30 odd, 40 odd, 50 odd years. It's a long time. 48 years of study, and this is sort of a typical identification card that we have made. The animal's name in the photograph, his name is Dugan, and to the next of it, I have made a copied an identification card. Right. All right, and what you see, on the identification mark, I've just noted that. I've noticed the cut in the ear, the cut on the upper lip, the spots in the face, and so forth. So these combined traits, they act like a sort of a barcode to help us to distinguish individuals. After a while, of course, you don't need these small traits. You get to know them just like a school teacher walks into a new classroom. The first day the kids look slightly different. By the end of the day, she knows how to tell them all apart without having to look at whether the kid's got a blonde hair or a cut on the nose and so forth. Anyway, the same applies to monkeys. Monkeys live in social groups, and these are very similar to ancient human clans. They're mother families, or sisterhoods. It's a grandmother, the adult females, the sisters, and their collective offspring. The males, the fathers in the group, they are immigrants from another group. They have come to mate, and they will leave their offspring, and they will eventually leave. They're not closely related to the females. Living in each family or each group, social group of monkeys has its own sort of home range or area where it lives. The females stay in those areas for their entire lives. The males may move out, and the daughters of the female that is born into a group, or a daughter, so to speak, she will never leave her mother's group. She will inherit the garden, the larder from her maternal ancestors, and that is how the home range, how the economic basis is sort of inherited socially from one generation to another amongst the females. And you'll notice that the area, the living spaces, the home ranges of these animals differ in size. It depends the size of the range, how much land area they need to live, depends on the number of animals and the quality of the habitat. So there are all these ecological relationships that are involved. Now, if you look at the level of the population of monkeys, you get a very interesting pattern. What is shown here on the bottom is the different years from January 1969 up to March 1975. I just took that time sample. And on the vertical, you have the number of animals in the entire population. And what you see is an increase in the number of animals during the birth season, and then there's a die-off. Again, animals die, the numbers decrease. Next birth season, again, the numbers increase. So it's a matter of going up and down, over in relation to more or less the availability of food resources. And if you take the average of the number of monkeys in the forest, in a natural, undisturbed forest, I should stress, the numbers remain the same. In other words, there's zero population growth. And the cap on the population is kept not by predators or by disease, but by the availability of food resources. The zero population growth also means that each individual in the population replaces itself by only one of its offspring. A female can have 10 babies, but on average only one will survive to actually replace her in the society. No monkey wants to be average. So there are high-ranking animals that will have 2 or 3 daughters that survive to reproduce, but you will do so at the cost of the 3 daughters of low-ranking females. Some females can have 10 babies, they'll give birth, but none of them really ever survive into the reproductive cohort. And the reason for this is that there's lots of competition for resources, for food resources. Females, in order to survive and to breed, need to have access to food. And these are natural resources. They need to find fig trees and other things in the forest. And depending on year, the amount of food resources is variable. The natural foods for macaques depends on fruit, mushrooms, tubers. And then during the summer, during the rainy season, they all look for food under the water as well. And there's lots of competition for this. Competition is intense for limited food resources. They will even steal food from one another's mouth. If you've seen that film, Temple Troop, came out about 10 years ago, shown on Rupa Vahini ad nauseam almost. You'll notice that there's one event where one female actually removes the food from the cheek pouches of another monkey. The competition is intense for food. And success in food competition determines the survival prospects of a female and her ability to have babies and how these babies survive. It's fairly intensive. About 50% of all infants born die before they even reach adulthood. The mother-infant bond is very strong, so sometimes mothers will even carry the carcass of their dried-up infant for months, for weeks on end until she finally drops it. The males, they have an additional challenge facing them. They eventually need to leave their mother's group to prevent inbreeding, and they need to fight their way into another group in order to achieve high rank. The males have these long dagger-like canine teeth that are not used for feeding, but these are tools, these are daggers used in inter-male competition. They wound one another with this, and they might even kill one another with these dagger teeth. And males have like the females, they have a very strict hierarchy. A high-ranking male is likely to be the most successful father, more so than low-ranking males. So in both the female and male strategies, high social rank confers an advantage in survival and reproductive success. Reproductive success being measured by the number of offspring and even grand offspring that an individual is able to procreate. Now, if you look at the rates of mortality, I'm sorry if this is a bit scientific for you, but I'll try to go through it so it's understandable. This is an age-specific mortality chart for macaques. And what is shown at the bottom is the age of macaques from 0, 5, 10, all the way up to 30 years old. And on the vertical, we have the rate of mortality, or that's basically the percentage of animals that die from 1 year to the next at a certain age. So for example, the very first point for the female curve, where it says 400, that means that of 1,000 animals born, or let's say of 100 babies born, 40% of them will die between birth and their first birthday. If you go to the next point, only about 15% of those who survive to their first birthday will actually survive to the second birthday. So this curve shows the strength, the intensity of mortality at different ages by different sex. And the overall pattern is that mortality for males and females is high at the beginning of life, then it drops to a low during the advent of adulthood at about 6 to 10 years of old. It remains low throughout life until they reach old age. The mortality rates increase again. But that's sort of a general pattern in vertebrates, including humans. I mean, the actual numbers are somewhat different, but the pattern is the same. But what's interesting here is that the males die at about twice the rate as adult females, the adult males do. And that's because they fight one another for access to females, for estrus females. They wound each other, and as a consequence, they die. There's a peak in mortality among adolescent males. This is a phase at which they have to leave their mother's group and find and associate themselves, find a bond, try to integrate themselves into another group for breeding. And these immigrant males, these juvenile males, or these adolescent males, are not necessarily very welcome in the new group because they pose a threat for resources for the females' infants. And for the adult males, these adolescent males coming in are, of course, also a threat for mate competition, so they don't particularly like them. So it's a particularly stressful phase for males then when they emigrate from their mother's group. But something peculiar happens in the child care of monkeys. And what you notice on this curve is that the males, that the females die at a greater rate than do their male peers in the first 5 years of life. And that is because the high-ranking females in a group, they really harass the daughters of low-ranking females. That's because they want to make living space in this limited, small home range that they have for their own daughters. So they really trash the low-ranking daughters or the daughters of low-ranking females. They're not so worried about the males of low-ranking females because they will anyway eventually emigrate from the group. They don't pose a long-term threat to the larder of the females. So we have very different parenting styles. Mothers treat their sons much better than their daughters. They allow them to, they groom them more. They share food with them more than with their daughters. And they allow them to nurse more frequently and for a longer duration of time. They are nursed, they are weaned at an older age. And we have collected about 250 milk samples from these macaques. We have had them analyzed, and lo and behold, the quality of milk for sons is better than it is for daughters. Now, if you were to bring this up in a medical conference, or I can imagine sitting in a hospital and suggesting to someone, we ought to really look at the quality of maternal milk because, I think that the quality of milk for sons is better than for daughters. You would be banned as a sexist, you can't be suggesting such things. It is only after this was discovered in monkeys that the medical community decided to look at maternal milk. I mean, they've been analyzing mother's milk for ages, but they've never looked at gender differences of the offspring. And indeed, even in humans, mother's milk for sons is of better quality than it is for daughters. Right? So, mothering style, and why this is because once males emigrate, they don't have any support of their family anymore. They need to make it on their own or need to form alliances with other males to fight their way into a new group. So mothers want to have a big, strong, sexy son who's successful, who can provide her lots of grandchildren. and a wimpy son is just not going to do it. So when she has a son, it's almost a headache. Oh my God, another son. How much of my resources, of bodily resources, do I need to invest? And it costs mothers. A mother who has a son has a longer time, she takes a longer time for her to recover to have a next baby because it's so costly to raise a son for her. Anyway, this is just a sort of little fact I'm throwing out for you that's relevant also to humans. Now, I talked about the population being limited by the food resources. These have three curves here of the growth trajectories of three neighboring groups of toque macaques. Two of them, you see in the bottom, they get hardly any access to garbage. This is the number of monkeys in that group over the 30-year period, from 1970 to 2000 approximately. When they don't have access to natural foods from humans, those macaque groups stay at zero population growth, or if they have a little bit of garbage, they grow a little bit. Now the top curve here, the red curve, which you see going off that's a group that has about more than 20% of their food resource is from human garbage. And what happens is that mortality rates drop, survival rates increase, and the numbers of macaques just increase. And that's the problem that we have right now in places like, in all sort of municipal areas where we have monkeys and humans, human garbage. So, for example, this is a common sight in so many smaller towns and larger towns, Candy. Monkeys, they don't bother looking for food in the forest. They know exactly where the garbage is going to be. They head for the garbage, and many of them survive more than naturally should survive. Also, monkeys are clever, you know. I mean, monkeys need to have access to water at least once a day. And in the natural forest, it may take, many hours of looking for water or a long trip to go to the nearest source of water. But with human taps around, water bottles, monkeys learn how to open a tap. They even know how to drink from a water bottle. I mean, monkeys are clever, they really are smart. We should appreciate them for how clever they are. Anyway, I'll leave that topic, and let's talk a little bit about mate choice in monkeys. Now, monkeys have a problem in that they're, well, not a problem, it's actually a privilege, whatever it is. They're polygamous, okay? Everybody mates with everybody, at least potentially. And they mate year-round. I mean, any time is good for sex. I mean, monkeys really like sex, as you've probably noticed. And they have so many opportunities to mate with close relatives, mothers, sons, sisters, aunt with nephew, and so forth. So, I mean, really, the question is, are they really inbred? To what degree are they inbred? And we all know that inbreeding in vertebrates is a very bad thing. You inherit genes from that potentially can kill you. The offspring of inbreeding or matings between close relatives can cause deleterious results. So it's something that vertebrates and mammals in general want to avoid at all costs. So it's reasonable to ask this question, seeing how these monkeys go around having fun with each other all the time, do they actually inbreed? We've looked at more than 1,000 genetic samples of macaques, and to our surprise, there is virtually no inbreeding. There's less inbreeding in this natural primate of macaques than has ever been found in any other natural population of mammal or vertebrate. Inbreeding is absolutely avoided. Less than 1% of animals were slightly inbred, which means there's matings between half-siblings or by accident a father and daughter. Father-daughter matings are very rare because once a father has sired offspring, they don't stay in the mother's group for more than 3 years normally, and they go and go elsewhere. But what happens occasionally is that a male may a group splits in half, and his daughter ends up in a different group, and he goes into that group, and his daughter happens to be there. Well, if his daughter is there, he'll mate with her. He doesn't know that it's his daughter. So anyway, it's very rare, and the point really is that macaques avoid inbreeding. And the main mechanism for avoiding inbreeding, this is a bit scientific again, but I'll walk you through it, is that males, when they're adolescent, they leave their mother's group for good. And this is just a very lovely, hard work, difficult to get kind of information that we have from these toque macaques accumulated over about 45 years of observations. And on the vertical, we have the number of individuals. On the bottom, again, we have age from 0 to 30. And what it shows is the light pink shows the number of offspring that males sire at the different ages. And starts at around 5, and it peaks at around 10 years old, and then it wanes. What's funny, what's interesting is that even old males, old grandfathers at 25 years old, they're not totally out of the picture. They still sire a few offspring. That was surprising to me. But the other thing that I'm trying to show here is the number of males that leave their mother's group in relation to age, and that's the darker pink curve on the left. And what it shows is that most males leave before they're 5 years old. Almost all of them have left by about 5 or 6 years old. So leaving the mother's group so that inbreeding is prevented, so when males reach reproductive age, they're not anywhere near their close female relatives. They just move elsewhere. But the more interesting point, of course, is there's this area of overlap. You'll see that the two curves overlap. Males are perfectly capable of producing young, but they're still in their mother's group. They're still hanging around with their sisters and aunts and so forth. That's the real test here. And our studies, behavioral and genetic studies have shown, indeed, males avoid mating with closer maternal kin, their mothers, their grandmothers, their half-sisters, aunts and nieces, even if the opportunity avails itself. They could mate with them, but they just don't. Mating with more distantly related relatives, for example, cousins, that's okay, that works. So, and opportunities, as I indicated before, with maternal, paternal kin, father-son, that's so, demographically doesn't even occur. It's not worth talking about. So there's some human parallels here. All cultures, close relatives don't marry. And of course we say, well, this is because we have religion, our teachers tell us not to. I'll say, no way, religious practitioners they are plagiarizing biology. Even a rat knows that he shouldn't be mating with its close mother. So it's okay to mate with with cousins, but not with closer relatives. So avoiding inbreeding is a universal human genetic trait that does not require cultural learning, as many people would have us believe. It is a phylogenetic trait that is practiced instinctively by most mammals, even the lowest of mammals. Even rats don't mate with their mothers and sisters. They also know better. They don't know better, they're just genetically programmed to not do that. All right, let's talk about my last topic of conversation, and that is fat in humans and other mammals. With fat, I mean adipose tissue. It's an important source of energy for survival and reproduction. And oddly enough, anatomists for centuries, they've been looking at muscles, skeletons, nerves, everything, but they've ignored body fat. In most texts of anatomy and veterinary, in these professional texts, there's only 1 or 2 pages devoted to adipose tissue. And in surgical texts, it's pretty clear. Fat is dismissed as a useless tissue until very recently. You know, in surgery, fat gets in the way, and they don't bother with it. So there's been no real intellectual investigation of body fat until very recently. At Polonrua, for example, we occasionally come across roadkill, so we take the opportunity to dissect the fat and weight it and so forth, and look through it. And we stumbled across some interesting facts.